Olá pessoal, e a nossa entrevista de hoje é muito mais do que especial. É histórica. Vamos conversar com um dos ícones da ufologia mundial. Os ufólogos mais experientes certamente o conhecem. Os novos ufólogos vão conhecer melhor ainda. Então vem comigo nessa entrevista inédita e exclusiva que o canal Desvendando Mistérios traz para vocês. Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, boa madrugada, onde você estiver. Eu sou o Thiago Luiz Tiquete. Sejam bem-vindos ao canal Desvendando Mistérios. O nosso entrevistado de hoje é Bruce Maccabee, ufólogo norte-americano que esteve à frente de grandes casos da ufologia. O caso das fotos de Trent, os avistamentos de Kenneth Arnold, as fotos dos astronautas da Gemini 11 e as incríveis e controversas fotos de Goof Breeze. Bruce Maccabee vai contar pra gente experiências que ele teve, casos interessantes e a sua percepção do fenômeno ufológico, além de contar com detalhes todos os casos que ele investigou, os mais importantes. Então vem comigo nessa entrevista incrível com Bruce Maccabee. Mas não se esqueça, você que gosta dos vídeos do canal e quer continuar curtindo, vendo novidades, não se esqueça de se inscrever no canal. Marque também o sininho, que é o lembrete, para sempre que tiver vídeo novo, uma entrevista inédita e exclusiva, você vai ser avisado. Não deixe também de dar um like em todos os mais de 400 vídeos. Você já viu as outras entrevistas que tem no canal? Vai lá. E por fim, não deixe de comentar todos os vídeos. Eu quero saber a sua opinião. Vamos então para essa entrevista histórica com um dos maiores ícones da ufologia mundial, Bruce Maccabee. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, thank you very much for being here in my YouTube channel. Welcome to Investigação OVNI channel and welcome to the Brazilian audience, sir. Well, I will start with the same questions that I make with all my guests. What led you to do UFO research, sir?
Well, when I was growing up, way back in the 50s and 60s, of course, I heard about flying saucers in the news media every now and then. And when I was going to school at American University in Washington, D.C. to get a degree in physics, I got interested in the news stories that were the stories about flying saucer sightings, which are quite numerous in 1965, 66, 67 time frame. And so I got some books and read up about it to see if there was really something there, or if it was all just a big mistake or a hoax or something like that. And I joined a UFO organization called NICAP, the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which existed back then in the late 50s and the 1960s and so on. And I actually went on some investigation with members of this NICAP organization. And the first cases that I was involved in investigating turned out to be quite likely to be real. It did not involve people who would be likely to be hoaxing what they were saying. So it sort of caught my attention. But there was another thing too, which caught my attention as a physicist, and that was the proposed explanations for sightings that were offered by the government. That is, the government is called Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book would essentially tried to prove that everything could be explained in a ordinary way. There's nothing unusual going on with these flying saucer sightings, and I evaluated the explanations that were offered. A good example involved the first flying saucer sighting by Kenneth Arnold, June 24th, 1947. That was the first sighting to be publicized in the press, and sort of alerted everybody to the fact that some things were flying around. And Project Blue Book proposes an explanation, and if you go to the Project Blue Book microfilm file, or get it on the internet nowadays, you can see that the official explanation of the Kenneth Arnold sighting is a mirage. You remember Kenneth Arnold talked about being in a small plane southwest of Mount Rainier in the state of Washington, and seeing these semicircular, flat, disc-like things flipping and flopping as they traveled along at a high speed past Mount Rainier and continued on. He could follow them down as far south as Mount Adams, a distance of about 50 miles that they crossed in 100 and some seconds. And the speed calculates out to about 1,700 miles per hour. Well, the official explanation is that Arnold saw a mirage. And so you ask yourself, what sort of a mirage could look like shiny discs sending out flashes of light and so on? And you realize that there aren't any mirages that can do that. And they're talking about mountaintop mirages. And a mountaintop mirage stays over the top of the mountain. It doesn't go left or right. So the explanation is there in official documentation, and it makes no sense from the point of view of optical physics. And there are numerous other cases that I examined the explanation, and it sort of increased my interest in the subject. Why are they getting away with proposing explanations that make no sense, and then leaving these explanations as the official explanation? But why doesn't somebody speak up and say that can't be true? There weren't any prominent scientists arguing in favor of actually seeing flying saucers or discs or whatever, and so that caught my interest. That there must be something going on here if the government is trying to get rid of it by offering stupid explanations.
You also wrote this book, 3 Minutes in June, that show all your investigation about the Kenneth Arnold sighting. In your opinion, what he saw was real flying discs, semicircular flying discs?
No doubt what he saw was real, and he made a formal report to the Air Force, the Army Air Force, in which he included a drawing showing a semicircular thing, as if you're looking down from the top of a semicircular thing with the rear end, the trailing edge being sort of like a convex point. You can see it in that booklet. There's a picture of the document that he sent to the Army Air Force with his drawing and his description of the sighting itself. I have no doubt that he saw something real.
It was an amazing book. I read it. Your investigation is quite perfect. But sir, you have been at the forefront of investigation into some of the most well-known UFO cases. I'd like to mention a few so that you could tell us about your investigation and conclusion. The first one I would like to talk is McMinnville Photos. The skeptic Philip Klass claimed until he died that the photos were fakes. What does it say about it?
Well, that's a very interesting case. It's probably the pictures. I don't know if you can post them if you have them available to put up right here. But the interesting thing about the McMinnville case taken by Paul Trent, 2 photographs. The photographs are clear enough so that you can say that this case is either a real thing, an unidentified flying object, or it's a hoax. There's no halfway point. Lots of UFO sightings turn out to be blurry enough or not well described or imaged that you can't tell whether it's real or not. But this one here has images that are so clear that it's obvious. As I said, it's either a real thing or a hoax. And these photos were taken in May of 1950, examined by a number of people, and then published in the newspaper in June of 1950. And then they were used in numerous books since then. In the 1960s, late 1960s, there was a special group commissioned by the Air Force to study flying saucer sightings. And one of the cases examined by the photographic analyst, William Hartman, he examined a number of photographic cases for this special commission. It became the so-called Conlon report. And Hartman did some clever atmospheric physics calculations and decided that the object was at quite a distance from the camera and was therefore large. So he wrote in his formal conclusion that all factors investigated seemed to point towards the conclusion that a strange, extraordinary flying object had passed within the sight of the witnesses, and they had taken 2 photos of it. Well, that conclusion was published in 1968, 68, and 69, and you would think that since Hartman, in a publication that was highly skeptical of this whole subject, you would think that his positive conclusion that there was something there would have resulted in a lot of activity, people trying to prove or disprove his conclusion. It turned out that nobody paid any attention to it except Klass and a friend of his, Robert Schaefer. In 1974, I decided to see if I could do anything with this, with these photos, and prove them one way or another. And so with Phil Klass's help, I managed to get the actual negatives that had been lost for a long period of time. I actually finally got a hold of the negatives and began an investigation. The first thing being, of course, to look for any indication of a string or some sort of a support for this object. It was assumed that if it was a hoax, this was like a 6-inch size model hanging from a string or somehow suspended. And the fact that there are electrical power wires passing over the image of the object gave an immediate suggestion as to how it would have been faked, namely by hanging a model oil from the wires. And then there would be a number of physics aspects to this case that, well, would have to be explainable. Martin had decided that the atmospheric physics calculation of how bright a dark area should be led him to conclude that this thing might be a kilometer or so away from the camera, which would make it many, many feet in size. So the skeptical approach would be to show that this object had to be small and nearby. And Phil Klass and Robert Schaefer had argued that it was a small object not too far from the camera, and published their conclusion. They were the only ones who actually directly tackled this case. They're the only ones who, studied it long enough. When I got the negatives, I did a bunch of tests on negatives, took them to a number of places. My investigation lasted several years. I called up the Trents. I talked to Mrs. Trent a number of times, and it was a great learning experience for me to find out how to analyze black and white photos for how black and white photography works, you might say. Ultimately, I concluded that you couldn't prove that the Trents hadn't faked it. You could always assume that the Trents were lucky and had made a model a certain way and a certain suspending string and so on that would be invisible, essentially, to the camera. Like, for example, if they used a black thread to support a model, the black thread would block some light from the sky. This image is silhouetted against the more or less uniform brightness sky in the background. If they had used a black thread or a black string to support this model, it would make an image of some sort on the camera, on the film. And if it was black, which typical folks here might think of, well, if I use a black thread, you won't be able to see it. But if it's silhouetted against a sort of a bright sky, it would make a dark line on the bright sky. So that's what you would look for. And if they picked a thread that was white or just off-white, it would be about the same brightness as the background sky, and you couldn't see it. You got to have contrast between one image and another image. You got to have contrast in order to see that there are differences. So a black thread can be picked up by the camera. A white thread probably couldn't be picked up by the camera. The point is, the Trents could have been lucky and picked the right color thread to be invisible to the camera, because the thread would be the same brightness as the background. The conclusion that you couldn't tell from the film, you couldn't tell from the photo whether or not it was a real thing or a lucky choice of suspending string or whatever.
Must be very lucky, man, isn't it?
My conclusion that this photo is real is really based on talking to Mrs. Trent, doing a lot of historical analysis of the case. It's on my website. Anybody can read 2 papers there. I don't know if you can put that up sometime or other, but the website has two in-depth papers. One of them, the first paper that I did was essentially strictly about the photography and try to estimate the distance of the object from the effective atmospheric scattering on images from objects that are far away. The first paper and the second paper includes the history of the photos and all the people who talked to the trench. Nobody that I talked to who had actually talked to the trench thought they would be likely to even think of making a hoax, to say nothing of trying to carry one out and maintain it over years. They died in the middle 1990s, 1995 and 1996, I think it was, and they maintained to the very end that their photos were real. So I have concluded that the photos were real.
That's great, sir. Well, you also investigate some photos taken by the Gemini 11 astronauts. They were, well, we have a lot of photos from astronauts and the space missions. This particular photo from Gemini 11, do you think they are real? They got something outside the Earth?
I have no doubt that they had photographed something that was outside their capsule. There are actually two astronaut cases that I have studied: the Gemini 11 in 1966 and the Skylab 3 in 1973. They're considerably different in nature. The Gemini 11, again, if you could put this is on my Facebook, and you can see copies of the photos that were taken. There were three photos showing images of something, and there's no the astronauts reported it after they landed. Actually, they reported seeing something before they landed, and NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command, claimed that they had photographed a satellite known as the Proton 3 booster rocket, and that was the only thing that the NORAD could come up with that could have been traveling past the Gemini 11 spacecraft. So in the early 1970s, I forget when I started working on it, and I got copies of the pictures from a NASA type of organization. I got copies of the pictures and studied them, and NORAD claimed that they photographed this object, the Proton 3 booster, and I calculated where the Proton 3 booster would be, and where at the time of the Gemini 11 was taking the pictures. And it turned out that the Proton 3 booster was 3,000 miles approximately behind the Gemini 11. There's no way that the Gemini 11 could have taken the picture of that Proton booster rocket, and so it remains unexplained. There's no doubt that there was something out there. They saw it, took a couple of pictures of it before it went in front of them, and especially after it went past them. It was in an area. The view of it was blocked by the spacecraft itself. Too bad they couldn't have seen it go from one spacecraft window to the next spacecraft window. But anyway, whatever it was, it's unidentified. The Skylab 3 situation was somewhat different. Skylab 3 was in orbit around September of 1973, I believe it was. And one of them, Owen K. Garrett, looking out through one of the windows of the spacecraft, saw a red object out there. And he told the other guys, and there were two other astronauts with him, and they all looked out, and they could see this red light sort of pulsating. And Owen K. Garrett had a camera and took three pictures of it. Took 4 pictures and came out on 3. And 2 of them, it's just a dot, a red dot. And then the last picture we got, it's a structured image. It's a weird structure, but clearly something that's not just a single body object. I don't know what it was, but in any case, it was traveling along with the Skylab 3. As far as I could see, they saw it for many minutes. At the speed the satellites travel, 17,000 miles an hour, it doesn't take long to travel a short distance, a few miles or a few tens of miles. And this object apparently was almost traveling at almost the same speed as the Skylab 3, because it was seen for a considerable time. You'd have to look at the pictures to see how strange it is. But anyway, whatever it was, it's unexplained.
And sir,
I might mention that there are no red satellites. Satellite colors are black, white, and shiny. Shiny metal. There's nothing red up there, and the photographs show that this is a saturated red color of whatever it is.
Yeah, what's something? And sir, you are one of the few, if not the only, ufologist to defend the veracity of the Gulf Breeze case. What made you believe that?
Well, the Gulf Breeze situation started in November of started in November of 1987. There's a commentary on my Facebook page, even as we speak. There's a commentary or a summary of the initial sightings in the Gulf Breeze collection of sightings. The first sighting was by a dog at 2:30 a.m. on November 11th, 1987. And the dog sort of pointed out where this thing was, and the lady who let the dog out of the house saw the dog was looking up into the sky, and she looked up, and there was this big object up there, which has become sort of a well-known shape. A well-known shape that was published in pictures in following weeks and months and years, actually. Anyway, I began an investigation of the Gulf Breeze sightings by assuming that, or believing that the photos taken by Ed Walters were probably fake. And gradually in the spring of 1988, as the investigation went on and other things happened besides just the visual sightings, I came to the conclusion that these things were real when Ed did something that nobody else had ever done. He was very cooperative, and this is one of the rare cases where the UFO investigators actually were able to impact on the events. They gave him the MUFON investigators in the Gulf Breeze area gave him a stereo camera, so-called Nimslow kind of camera. It has 4 lenses on the front. It takes 4 pictures. You click the shutter once and you get 4 pictures automatically on this camera. And it's designed to create pictures that look 3D when you put them on a special type of background. Well, anyway, what we didn't tell Ed was that Ed Walters has been taking a lot of pictures with a Polaroid camera. Now he's given a 35 millimeter sealed camera. He got pictures of some object with it, and I subsequently figured out that he had photographed something that was a couple of feet in size and 70 feet away maybe. And the reason I was able to do that was because of the parallax effect of the two lenses that were farthest apart on the camera were about 2.5 centimeters apart, which is the approximate spacing of grown-up's eyeballs. the spacing between your eyes creates what's known as parallax, which is the angle from the left eye to an object is slightly different than the angle from the right eye to the object. Anyway, the parallax effect allowed me to calculate the distance, and I could measure the size of the image and then multiply the angular size of the image times the calculated distance and come up with 2.5 feet or so on this object that he photographed in February of 1988. Then in May of 1988, May 1, he got another stereo photo. This time it was very nice. Some objects appeared in the photo which were known. He was on the shoreline of Gulf Breeze, photographing towards the south in a view that encompassed lights along a bridge south of Gulf Breeze. And so the distance of the lights from where he took the picture was known. That provided a calibration. He took these pictures because he saw suddenly appear out over the water 2 objects. One was the typical type of object that he had photographed numerous times, and well, starting in late in December of 1987, he started photographing circular object with a light on the top and a power light, he called it, on the bottom. So there was, in this picture, in the stereo picture taken in May 1, 1988, had an image of this round type of thing that Ed did photographing. It also had an image of what he had gotten, the image like he got with his Nimslow camera. So he had 2 objects in this photo of May 1. He had left and right, which were well, 2-foot spacing between cameras. Instead of one camera with several lenses, spaces, different. He actually used 2 Polaroid cameras spaced at 2 feet, and that provided a considerable baseline for a parallax calculation. Now, the bottom line is, when I got finished with all these calculations, I found that he had taken pictures that were entirely consistent. The stereo pictures were entirely consistent with what he had had before. And it would be very difficult for somebody to make that come true. you'd have to do calculations beforehand, space your camera correctly, and photograph models that were virtually impossible because these craft images appeared out over water. You'd have to have a model hanging 400 feet away from the camera for the big one, and 100 and some feet for a small object. It has to be all calculated first, and then photographed. And it was a type of thing that you can't read up in books on how to do this, the stereo calculations. I had to figure it all out myself. And I knew that Ed didn't know how to do it. So when I saw these pictures that Ed took, and I worked through the calculations, I concluded that it had to be real. Again, you can find this out on my website.
Okay, so well, I remember that in 1997, Jaime Maussan revealed to the world an incredible footage of a UFO over Mexico City. You were the first to investigate and concluded to be a hoax. You were 1997. You were quite criticized. How was this investigation?
Is this, you're talking about the object that went behind, appeared to go behind the building?
Yes, that's it. That's that.
It was traveling from left to right. It goes behind the building.
Yeah, and circling.
It was rotating.
Rotating, yeah.
It appeared to be rotating. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while since I thought about that one. I at first thought it was real, and I thought we really had something. Maybe we could get some physics out of the way this thing was rotating and wobbling at the same time. But well, like I said, I haven't thought about this for a long time. I think I concluded it could be a hoax based on a lack of, partially based on a lack of sightings by other people. But I can't remember what some of the key points of this particular case were. Nobody's asked me about it in the last 20 years.
They always a first time, but no worry, because I remember that was amazing, and many people said, well, that's the hard evidence that we need. But
there's something about the person who took the video never admitted it, or the videographer was unknown and never came forward. We had nobody to interview, if I recall correctly.
And you, sir, you have another among your work is the reanalysis of the statistics and the results of the famous special report number 14 of the Battelle Memorial Institute Blue Book Project.
Yeah.
A massive analysis of more than 3,200 Air Force cases as of the mid of 1950s. What did you discover researching this, re-examining these cases?
Well, I didn't re-examine the cases themselves, but I looked at the statistics, which were all put out in this book, the Special Report 14. And perhaps the most important conclusion they came to was when they divided the 3,201 sightings, they categorized them as excellent, good, doubtful, and poor. Excellent being, you know who all the witnesses are, you get a good description of the object. Everything seems to be on the up and up, so to speak. Good was just not quite as good as excellent. Poor was a typical case where there was something probably missing, and you don't have enough information to arrive at a good conclusion. And doubtful, the doubtful cases were the ones that seem to be more likely to be hoaxes or misidentifications. Hoaxes and misidentifications made up the bulk of the poor ones, the poor and doubtful ones. So anyway, the thing that they discovered when they finished these dividing the cases in this way, as I said, excellent, good, doubtful, and poor, they found that the percentage of unidentified was larger in the excellent and good collection of sightings than they were was in the doubtful and poor.
You also re-examined the results of the 1969 Condon Committee study, and you, sir, concluded that Edward Condon lied about the results. Is it right?
About the McMinnville case?
Yes, the 1969 Condon Committee study. And
right.
You concluded that Edward Condon had lied about the results.
Had lied about the results of a particular case you're talking about? Because he did make a mistake or lied with respect to the Trent case. He says he was talking to a photo analyst and said that the Trent case was too fuzzy for worthwhile photogrammetric analysis. And he was countering William Hartman's conclusion that there might be something real there. And Hartman had done photometry, photometric calculation that has to do with the relative brightnesses of objects. Not photogrammetric, which has to do with the directions, sizes, and shapes, and so on. So in other words, Condon somehow mixed up photogrammetric with photometric. And I don't think that I'm sure he knew the difference between photogrammetric analysis and photometric analysis. So I think he sort of lied at that point by implying that the photogrammetric analysis played any role in Hartman's calculation of how far away the object was. But I'm not sure I addressed the case or situation that you're talking about. I would like to say about the special report number 14, before we leave that. They found that the percentage of unidentified was greater in the excellent collection of sightings than was the percentage in the poor. Now you would expect that the best sightings made by the best witnesses with the best details and so on would be most likely to be explained because it would be clear as to what was being seen. Instead, they found that the excellent sightings are more likely to be, if an excellent sighting was categorized as being unexplainable, it's more likely that it would be unexplainable if it was one of these excellent sightings.
And you wrote another book called The Legacy of 1962, Year of the UFO. Why do you consider this year as having the greatest impact on the history of the UFOs?
Well, I wrote the book because, first of all, I thought everybody should be aware of sort of like how spectacular was the summer of 1952 UFO wise. It was sort of a unique experience for the United States and the government and so on to have literally hundreds of sightings going on, and yet the Air Force was poo-pooing everything and saying it all could be explained and so on. You really have to look at some of the newspaper clippings, newspaper stories about this to get an idea of what it must have been like. People collecting information, the Air Force collecting information from military people, Air Force officers and so on, as well as the average person. All these people were sending in reports. The people collecting all this information might well have thought that World War III was going to start at any time, being a war with the aliens. But anyway, I thought that people should understand all this stuff that went on and how the government managed to get through that whole time period without admitting that something unusual was going on. They just blatantly offered stupid explanations. One of the most obvious evidence of failure to tell the truth, I guess you could say, occurred when General Sanford had his press conference on July 26th or 28th, I guess, whatever, 1952. General Sanford was directed by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force to hold a press conference, and I guess he felt that he had to explain everything away. He referred to temperature inversions as affecting the radar. Radar was picking up strange objects. He didn't address the visual sightings. He just talked about the radar detection and claimed that they were a result of temperature inversions that make the radar beam bend. As the radar beam is initially slanted upwards, if it comes out of the radar antenna slanted upwards, and if the atmosphere is in a certain condition, it can bend the beam back downwards to the ground, and the radar can detect targets on the ground that seem to be up in the air somewhere, but in fact are not. And so he's saying a lot of these radar targets the result of atmospheric effects. I think the book points out how the government was publicly playing down all the sightings, saying it all could be explained. Privately, they were worried about it, and they set up the Robertson panel to decide and make a decision as to how they're going to handle this in the future. And the way to treat these sightings turned out to be debunking, and that was a term actually used in the Robertson panel report.
Just to finish, Doctor, what images or photographs do you consider to be the best evidence that we have been visited by other civilizations?
Well, a lot of it, it's kind of hard to say which is the best. As soon as you've got a photographer or radar track or whatever, you've got good evidence. Probably the sightings that converted me were the ones that occurred in New Zealand in 1978. These were important sightings. Important sightings because they were multiple witness and involved something that you don't usually get. Nowadays, it's common to have recordings of video from a phone, but back in the late 1970s, few people had cell phones, and they weren't camera phones anyway. So nowadays it's hard to imagine something happening without somebody videotaping it. In the New Zealand case, in 1978, they didn't have cell phone cameras. But
the Kaikoura case, isn't it? The Kaikoura case.
Yes. And in this series of sightings, you had the pilot and the co-pilot, and oddly enough, a newspaper reporter, a cameraman, and a sound recorder person, all on an airplane flying south from Wellington, New Zealand to Christchurch, New Zealand, and they detected on ground radar, they detected targets, and in some cases saw lights associated with the crew on the people on the airplane saw lights appear where the targets were indicated by the radar. And the radar targets were the weird type that hover in one place, stay in one place for a period of time, and then suddenly they're gone. You have to think of it radar sweep and sweep or rotation. The beam rotates in 12 seconds. So every 12 seconds you get a sampling of whatever targets there are in a certain area. And if the targets stay there, they occur in the same place each time the beam sweeps around. Well, these beam sweeps indicated that the radar target could travel many miles of distance in 12 seconds. Somewhat similar to what's been reported for the Tic Tac sighting, and that occurred in 2004, I guess, and were released, information released in the last few years. What I'm saying is radar aspects of these UFOs that were detected in 1978 agree with what was reported by the Navy pilots in 2004, the Tic Tac sighting.
Well, Doctor, I would like to thank you very much for being here at my YouTube channel. You have a big fans in Brazil. Your research is very well known here in Brazil. We know you, we read your books, and I will leave in the description of the video, I will leave all the links for your website and to who wants to buy your books. I have this 3 minutes in June, and I have also the legacy of 1962. So thank you very much for your time, Doctor.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It keeps me on my toes somewhat.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to interview you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.